Hi, my name is Alyson Meyer Gould. I'm a staff attorney with the Colorado Water Trust. The topic I will be presenting upon is the Poudre Flows in-stream flow augmentation plan, which will be the first of its kind and represents a new paradigm for flow restoration in Colorado. Before I get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Colorado Water Trust. We are a Denver-based nonprofit working statewide to restore flows to Colorado's rivers in need. We were formed in 2001 to partner with Colorado's in-stream flow program and amplify its work. We work with water users to put together voluntary transactions to benefit the environment, and we work within the prior appropriation system and compensate water users at fair market value. This year is the Water Trust's 20th anniversary, and over the past 20 years, we've helped restore about 13.5 billion gallons of water to about 589 miles of natural stream. All right, moving into the presentation, I've broken it down into three parts. The first part is background, a little history on prior appropriation in Colorado and the in-stream flow program. Then in part two, I'll discuss the various permanent flow restoration paradigms, beginning with in-stream flow appropriations and acquisitions, and then a little bit about traditional augmentation plans, and finally, in-stream flow augmentation plans. In part three, I'll give an overview of the Poudre Flows in-stream flow augmentation plan as it stands today. In order to understand the in-stream flow program, it's important to understand where it fits into the timeline of Colorado water law. Although the history of water use in Colorado extends far before this, let's start at the Colorado Constitution. The Colorado Constitution was adopted in 1876 and guarantees the right to divert unappropriated water for application to beneficial use. Next, in 1878, the General Assembly passed a law addressing determination of priorities and distribution of water according to these priorities. Shortly thereafter, the new law was put to the test by a drought, which created a conflict between the ditch operators on the Poudre River. Faced with this conflict, the General Assembly found that it needed a way to assign and administer water rights priorities and passed a couple of resolutions giving this authority to the water courts and state water officials. In 1903, the Adjudication Act extended water adjudication to all beneficial uses, not just irrigation. That is, except in-stream flow. In-stream flow only became a recognized beneficial use that could be held by the Colorado Water Conservation Board in 1973. For some context, this photo shows a picture of the Eisenhower Tunnel that also broke ground in 1973. To put that all together, Colorado courts have been open to confirm irrigation water rights for 141 years, while in-stream flow water rights have only existed for 48 years. Once the in-stream flow program was established in 1973, it continued to evolve. This diagram from Water Education Colorado shows some of those landmarks in that evolution. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to highlight the 2020 bubble, which is when in-stream flow augmentation plan legislation was passed, which is 47 years after the program began. Now that we've set the historical stage, let's get into what makes an in-stream flow augmentation plan different from the other permanent legal mechanisms that preceded it. In order to illustrate how these various mechanisms work, let's start with a basic example. Here we have a 10 cubic feet per second or CFS stream with two diversions. The first is a senior diversion with a priority of 1900 for 2 CFS. The second is a diversion with priority of 1950 for 4 CFS. For simplicity, I'm going to disregard return flow and transit losses in all of my examples. For our first stream flow restoration example, let's take an in-stream flow appropriation. As a new appropriation, it takes on the priority of when its application was filed. As discussed in Part 1, in-stream flow was not recognized as a beneficial use for about 70 years after all other beneficial uses. As such, an appropriated in-stream flow with a priority of 1980 is pretty common. So in our example, we've added an appropriated in-stream flow for 4 CFS at the top of the reach with a priority of 1980. But because it's junior to the other downstream diversions, part of it is diverted along the reach. Next up is an acquired in-stream flow. This is a water right that already existed but was changed for in-stream flow use. As such, it maintains the priority of the original right. In this example, we have a super senior right of 1890 that was changed to in-stream flow use. Because it is senior to the other diversions, it is not diverted along the reach and the whole 4 CFS is maintained throughout. Acquired in-stream flows are far less common than appropriated in-stream flows. According to one back-of-the-napkin estimate, they make up only about 3% of the in-stream flow rights in the state. The next mechanism we'll discuss is a traditional augmentation plan, but first it's important to understand what it's intended to do. Generally speaking, an augmentation plan is intended to replace out-of-priority diversions in time, location, and quantity, thereby preventing injury to other water rights. So let's take an example like this, where a junior water right comes in and diverts 8 CFS upstream of the 2 more senior rights. The result is that the 1950 priority does not get water and the stream is dried up. To fix this problem, the 2020 priority can augment the stream flow by introducing additional flow from a water right decreed for augmentation purposes. In this example, the augmentation water is in the form of an upstream reservoir release. As you can see, an additional 4 CFS is added to the stream, which is enough flow to ensure that the 1950 priority is able to divert its full right. However, importantly for our purposes, although the 1950 priority is no longer injured, there is still dry up in the stream. This outcome is logical because there is no requirement or incentive for the 2020 priority to introduce more water to the stream than is necessary to prevent injury, and even if they did, there is no way to ensure that any additional water that they might add isn't just diverted out of the stream by another user. So legally, this is the state of play as of 2020. As I noted previously, in 2020, legislation was passed that confirmed the use of augmentation water for in-stream flow purposes. To be more specific, the legislation did 4 major things. First, the flow rate can be enough to preserve and improve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. This ability is the same as for an acquired in-stream flow water right, but stands in contrast to an appropriated in-stream flow water right that can only be used to preserve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. Second, to be included in an in-stream flow augmentation plan, the sources of replacement water must already be quantified and changed for augmentation purposes. The original sources of replacement water that are included in an augmentation plan are often referred to as seed water. The owner of the seed water must consent to the use of the water right in the plan. Once the plan is decreed, additional sources of replacement water can be added, as with the traditional augmentation plan. Third, the in-stream flow augmentation plan cannot cause injury to other decreed water rights or administratively approved exchanges. The underlying decrees that changed and quantified the seed water remain in full force and effect, and additional terms and conditions can be added on top of that if they aren't enough. Last, any modification to existing diversion structures to operate the in-stream flow augmentation plan must be agreed to by the structure owner and paid for by the augmentation plan proponent. Now that we've outlined what the legislation did, let's plug it into the example. Here we have a seed water of 4 CFS that is added at the top of the reach. It continues through the reach without being diverted by the other diversions. As you can see, this looks a lot like the acquired in-stream flow example, the big difference being that the water added at the top of the reach is decreed for augmentation, not for in-stream flow use. This example also has similarities to a traditional augmentation plan. However, the water added to the stream remains in-stream, boosting flows throughout the entire reach. Now that we've discussed the new flow restoration paradigm, let's get into how it's being put into practice. The Poudre River is located in northeast Colorado in Water Division 1. Its headwaters are in the Roosevelt National Forest and it flows through Fort Collins and Greeley to its confluence with the South Platte River. It is an extremely hardworking river, meaning that it provides water for a lot of uses and a lot of users and is subject to complex administration by state water officials. Under some circumstances, much of the flow of the Poudre River is used outside of the channel, resulting in reduced flow and even dewatering within the channel. Here are a few snapshots the Water Trust has taken over the years of some of the pinch points on the river. As noted at the beginning of the presentation, conflicts on the Cache-la-Poudre River gave rise to some of Colorado's first water laws. So, perhaps it's fitting that the first in-stream flow augmentation plan is also planned for the Cache-la-Poudre River. However, instead of arising out of conflict, this time the innovation arose out of cooperation. The parties that are cooperating to form the Poudre Flows partnership are comprised of a diverse group of entities with varied interests. First, we have Thornton, Greeley, and Fort Collins that are fiscal contributors and who are also supplying the seed water rights. Next, we have the water users, Cache-la-Poudre Water Users Association and Northern Water Conservancy District, with Northern also providing fiscal support. Then there are the state entities, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, who are the environmental need experts, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, which will hold the in-stream flow water right. Last is the Colorado Water Trust that serves as the fiscal agent, fundraiser, project facilitator, and who has engaged Spronk Water Engineering on behalf of the group. Perhaps most importantly, the parties have all worked on and agreed to a memorandum of understanding outlining how the Poudre Flows group will function now and in the future. The next aspect of the Poudre Flows project is one that I am far from qualified to do justice, the flow analysis. For my simple brain, it consists of 4 basic questions. First, what is the flow now? Second, what flow do the fish need and or want? Third, what is the difference between 1 and 2? And finally, can the seed water make up some of this difference? When qualified experts do this type of analysis, the result looks something like this. A few things to note. First are the gauges that help address the what is the flow now and what will it be when additional water is added. Next, we have the preserve and improve flow rates for each segment that addressed what flow the fish need and or want. Finally, we have the seed water rights and where it is available. If we put this all together, the plan is to add the seed water to the stream when it is available and when it is needed to boost the flow in the stream up to the rates needed to preserve or improve the environment. The last aspect of the Poudre Flows project I'd like to touch upon is the process to get it in place. First, there was the development phase, which included some serious out-of-the-box thinking, a statutory amendment, formulating a memorandum of understanding, preliminary engineering, and of course, outreach. Next is CWCB approval. Specifically, the CWCB has to approve the seed water rights for use in the plan and give the green light to file an application with the Water Court. The Water Court process is up next and will proceed before the Division I water judge, just like any other augmentation plan. Then, as with any other augmentation plan, after it's approved on paper, it must be put to work in the real world. Finally, additional sources of replacement water can be added to the augmentation plan so long as it meets with the CWCB approval and any other required approval. With that, you may be asking, where is the Poudre Flows project now? Well, we are here. We got CWCB approval in January and filed the Water Court application in April. The plan is now pending before the Division I Water Court. Before I end my presentation, let me do just a quick recap. First, as background, we touched upon the beginning of Colorado's prior appropriation system, how in-stream flow use arrived relatively late to the party, and how in-stream flow augmentation plans are the latest to arrive. In Part 2, we went through the various permanent legal mechanisms used for stream flow restoration, beginning with in-stream flow appropriations, which tend to be relatively junior, in-stream flow acquisitions, which are relatively rare, traditional augmentation plans, which are not designed to benefit in-stream flow, and last, in-stream flow augmentation plans that are designed to benefit in-stream flow and combines the benefits of an acquired in-stream flow, but with more flexibility and capability for adaptation. In the last part, we went through the Poudre Flows project, how it is designed for a hardworking river, is born out of the innovation and collaboration of a diverse group of partners. We skimmed the surface of the flow analysis and talked about the procedural process and where the Poudre Flows project is at today. With that, I would like to thank you for your interest and encourage you to get in contact with the Water Trust if you have any questions. Thanks again.